Due to cinematography and a degree of embarrassment by historians, the Hitler Youth, or in German Hitlerjugend, evokes only a single association: the poor and unfortunate sent by force to the front against an enemy equipped to the teeth. For example, the scene in Fury when teenagers in Nazi German uniforms under the command of an SS officer come out of the house evokes nothing but pity. However, in fact, it was not quite like that, or more accurately, not at all like that. This is X-War History. Welcome. Today on this channel we will tell you about brutality of the Hitler Youth organization. Initially created as a soldiers' workforce, the Hitler Youth educated their cadets in a spirit of steadfastness, determination, and wholehearted devotion to the German state. Physical training and military education were combined with powerful ideological indoctrination, which produced results that were sometimes guttier than could be imagined. The alleged participation of underage fighters in the Second World War was made possible by the so-called total mobilization, when everyone from the smallest to the largest was drafted to defend Germany. However, there's plenty of evidence that the children of the Hitler Youth were, for instance, also in the occupied Soviet territories. By an incident, already in 1943, the SS system created the 12th SS Tank Division Hitlerjugend, which recruited the best recruits born in 1926. As the historian Zaleski wrote, in the summer of 1943, more than 10,000 people had already gathered in specially created training camps to be trained and get into the division. And on June 6th, combined Anglo-American Operation Overlord began. In the first days, the 12th SS Tank Division Hitler Youth showed itself very brightly, inflicting great damage to the Allies with minimal damage to themselves, and earning a reputation as quite ruthless fanatics not only among the enemies, but also among the German troops. In just 1 month of service, the division lost 60% of its men killed, wounded, and missing. Immediately afterwards, the division was thrown into the Falaise area, where the Hitlerjugend again held off Allied forces for a month, allowing German troops to break out of the entrapment. Casualties were as high as 80%. Besides the division, though, the young people of the Nazi organization showed themselves sufficiently not only in battles, but also during the so-called punitive operations. For example, in occupied Lviv, members of the Hitler Youth trained in shooting at living targets. They grabbed people blindly, lined them up by height, and began to kill them one by one. These same mass shootings were also attended by young women, the so-called Blitzmädchen, who had received special training in firing rapid-fire weapons. In Rivne, these same nice ladies made a real horrifying show out of the carnage. The audience was the victims themselves and the officers of the garrison, who came along with their wives. Blitzmädchen first staged a show in the form of a hunt, shooting at old people, women, and teenagers. Then they threw the youngest ones in the air, trying to hit them in the head. A number of historians claim that the Hitler Youth also acted as guards in the concentration camps, and they escaped punishment solely because of their age, because no one could imagine that they could be among the most murderous executioners. This also explains why there is little documentary evidence of the activities of the Hitler Youth, and those that do exist are either hushed up or scrupulously erased from history. A large number of American and British servicemen noted that the greatest cruelty and inhumanity was shown not by the Nazi German soldiers themselves, but by the young soldiers educated under the Hitler Youth. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Daniel, speaking of the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, referred to Nazi criminals as well. There were 4 men standing there, young SS men, maybe even Hitler Youth. They looked pretty young. They were shooting at corpses and at living people, diligently targeting men and women in the genitals to inflict maximum pain. I shot 3 of them, and the 4th ran away. Let us note that veterans mentioned some excessive cruelty of the Hitler Youth. The captives were massively accused of crimes, but for unknown reasons the case went no further than accusations. What is interesting here is that those captured on the battlefield were generally considered prisoners of war, and it was stupid enough to accuse the same infantry soldiers of committing certain crimes. A soldier acts like a soldier, right? But in spite of this, however, it was pointed out that the Hitler Youth never took POWs. Surely, in response, the enraged soldiers also began to destroy the combatants of the Hitlerjugend without any mercy. Actually, this is where the thesis that the unfortunate German boys were allegedly forced to fight is shattered by the fact that these very boys were not forced to be truly vicious. By the way, they also went to war voluntarily. As former member of the Hitlerjugend Hans-Dietrich Nicolaisen recalled, We were armored with French rifles of incredible length. We had to put cartridges in our coat pockets. We had no ammunition pouches. Everyone had a grenade launcher. We stuffed the rounds in our pants pockets. We stuffed the hand grenades in our belts. That is how we went to our lines. Nicolaisen goes on to describe at length and vividly the fighting spirit with which these presumably unhappy children marched. Suffice it to say that even veteran frontline soldiers were amazed at the extreme cruelty of the young wolves of the Reich. Numerous soldiers and officers recounted how the Hitlerjugend ruthlessly shot and beat prisoners to death. Wounded men who fell into the hands of the Hitlerjugend awaited a long and painful death. There are fragmentary accounts of how they deliberately set fire to wounded soldiers lying in the streets, and deliberately set fire to crewmen who had escaped from a downed tank. Moreover, the warlike and somewhat ecstatic nature of the Hitler Youth often left many people speechless. There were occasions when soldiers caught the Hitler Youth at the time of the massacre of prisoners or wounded. Many were struck by the inhumanity and over-the-top cruelty. Hitler's boys recognized no rules and had no intention of abiding by them. More importantly, they had no sense of self-preservation, so some were willing to go to death for the sake of at least a ghost and a tiny victory. Thus, a participant of the storming of Berlin after the war told how he was wounded during the battle. One of them fired a round from a Faust patron and wounded me. It was a little boy in Hitler Youth uniform. Here it is important to note that the boy fired the Faust patron at one man. In other words, he was actually hunting for a soldier. By the way, for example, the Red Army suffered quite serious losses in Berlin. And the reasons for these losses were those very Hitler Youth fighters who ambushed soldiers or officers and killed them, attacking unexpectedly. There were quite a few who shot soldiers and officers using sniper rifles after the long-awaited capitulation. Furthermore, the victims of the Hitler Youth were also prisoners released from the camps and local residents who turned to the soldiers for help. In fact, anyone could become a victim of the executioners, since they had no rules. But certainly not all of them were like that. There were those in the Hitler Youth who rescued the wounded, for example. However, even sketchy information suggests that the Hitler Youth is a whole stratum of still unexamined crimes against humankind that continues to be hushed up to this day. Like, for example, the burnt-out car with the wounded or several shot doctors in a hastily equipped hospital in one of the half-destroyed houses. All of it on the hands not of the active army, but of the Hitler Youth boys. Few people know today, by any chance, that the Hitlerjugend in Germany itself was entrusted with the direct duties of the SS troops, such as regulation, inspection, control, apprehension, and even arrest. Again, the documents on the activities of the field have not been made public anywhere until now. Thank you for watching our video, subscribe to X War History and leave a like.